White cops framed a black woman, bribed a judge, but they never expected who she really was. Eliana Brooksnever imagined her routine drive home would change her life forever. A dedicated community advocate, she had spent the evening mentoring at-risk youth, only to find herself staring at flashing police lights in her rear-view mirror. What started as a simple traffic stop spiraled into a nightmare, accused of a crime she didn't commit, framed by corrupt officers and thrown into a legal battle designed to break her. Eliana was fighting against a system that had already decided her fate. The cops had planted evidence. The judge had been bribed. Every move seemed rigged against her. But what they didn't know, Eliana wasn't just another victim. She was someone they never should have underestimated. Stay with me, because this story will expose just how deep corruption can go, and what happens when the wrong woman is pushed too far. Eliana Brooks glanced at the digital clock on her car's dashboard. It glowed 11:47 p.m. in bright green numerals. She was on her way back from a long day at the community center in Oakwood, a fictional small city in the south of Charleston County, South Carolina, where she volunteered 3 nights a week. The route home was dark and winding, lined with old trees that curved like eerie fingers over the narrow road. It was a path she knew by heart. She'd grown up around these parts, had walked these very roads as a teenager, returning from choir practice, a backpack slung over her shoulders as she made her way through night after night, dreaming big about her future. That was a decade ago. Now Eliana was 28, with a master's degree in community administration, and a drive to uplift every neglected corner of her hometown. Her heart was heavy that night, for she'd just finished consoling another family who'd lost a loved one to a spiral of addiction. But as she stared ahead at the long stretch of asphalt, she tried to reassure herself. She would keep fighting, that was her nature. It happened so suddenly. A flash of headlights came up behind her, glaring in her rearview mirror. Then blue and red lights swirled into a frantic dance of color. Lights came up behind her, glaring in her rearview mirror. Then blue and red lights swirled into a frantic dance of color. Sirens tore through the silence, and Eliana felt her heart begin to race. This was not the first time she'd been pulled over. In Oakwood, cops had a habit of picking on people who didn't belong in certain neighborhoods after dark. Even though Eliana had lived in the same 2-bedroom cottage for years, she slowed down, put on her turn signal, and carefully pulled to the side of the road. Her hands trembled. She took a breath, telling herself she'd done nothing wrong. All her registration and insurance were up to date. There was no reason for her to fear. Yet the fear settled in anyway, creeping along her spine like a cold, merciless snake. Eliana rolled down her window, hearing the crunch of gravel as 2 officers approached. She flicked on the overhead interior light and placed her trembling hands on the steering wheel, praying this would be just a routine check. Her eyes caught the reflection of the officers in the side mirror, and she noticed their posture. Rigid, aggressive. One had a flashlight, shining it across her back seat with no courtesy or greeting. License and registration. The taller officer barked, shining his flashlight directly into her eyes. His nameplate read, Officer Travis Holden. She held back a sigh. Yes, officer, she said calmly, retrieving her wallet. May I ask why I've been stopped? His partner, a stocky man with a grim smile and the name Brian Sloan on his uniform, gave her a once-over. Speeding, he said, even though Eliana was sure she'd stuck meticulously to the speed limit. And her taillights out. A swift pang of worry seized her. She'd had her car inspected just a month ago. The taillights were fine early that evening, but she knew it was useless to argue. She handed over her license and registration. Officer Travis walked back to patrol car, while Brian Sloan remained close by, shining his beam of light directly onto Eliana's face. Long minutes trickled past. She could see Travis messing around in his cruiser, probably checking her records. Eliana tried to stay calm. She'd done nothing wrong. All they'd find was a squeaky clean record. No tickets, no arrests, no shady history. Eventually, Travis returned. Eliana noticed an odd expression flickering across his face, anticipation mixed with cruelty. Step out of the vehicle, he said. Eliana's heart thumped hard in her chest. Why? What's the problem? She asked. keeping her voice as level as possible. "Step out of the vehicle," Travis repeated more firmly. His hand hovered near his holster. She didn't want to give them any reason to escalate. With shaky hands, Eliana unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door. She stepped out into the sticky summer night, her legs unsteady on the grass beside the road. The moon hung overhead, illuminating her fear for anyone to see. If only there was anyone around to witness. Travis turned his flashlight on her trunk. "Pop it open," he ordered, throwing a quick glance at Brian Sloan. Eliana stiffened. "Officer, I don't consent to a search." But Brian Sloan already snatched the keys from her grip. "Open it," he repeated, ignoring her protest. "Unless you got something to hide." Her chest felt tight. "I haven't done anything wrong," she insisted. "You have no probable cause." "Probable cause?" Travis mocked her. "Look at you. You're the one out here this late, driving suspiciously and with a busted taillight." Brian Sloan pushed the key into the trunk. His broad back blocked Eliana's view. She heard rustling, rummaging. Then, as if on cue, a triumphant laugh rang out. Brian Sloan turned, brandishing a small Ziploc bag. "Well, would you look at this?" he said. The bag contained a white powder Eliana immediately recognized as either cocaine or heroin. She felt her stomach drop. "That's not mine," Eliana shouted. The panic in her voice was raw. "You planted that." "I've never touched anything like that in my life." Her eyes darted between the two officers, both looking unbearably smug. She realized in that moment that this was far from a random stop. This was a setup, whether it was racially motivated or something else. Eliana understood she was being cornered. Her mind spun. Did she know too much about the corruption in Oakwood? Had she angered someone at City Hall with her endless campaigning for social justice? Officer Travis grabbed her arm with iron force, swinging her around to cuff her wrists. "Eliana Brooks," he said, reading from her license with cold finality, "you're under arrest for possession with intent to distribute." And just like that, Eliana felt her world tilt upside down. They took her to the Oakwood police station, a squat, gray concrete building that looked as bleak as Eliana felt inside. The booking process was a blur. Fingerprints, photographs, the humiliating pat-downs. She tried to ask for a lawyer, but the officers ignored her demands, continuing the fiasco as if she was nothing but a piece of cargo. Several hours later, Eliana found herself in a holding cell. Overhead, fluorescent lights buzzed with white noise, intensifying her throbbing headache. She sat on a cold bench, hugging her arms to her chest. The rank smell of sweat and bleach filled her nostrils. She tried to hold on to reason, forcing her mind to think logically. She needed to get out of here, needed to call her lawyer. Tasha, her best friend from high school, was now a practicing defense attorney in Charleston. Savannah would know exactly what to do, but nobody came. Time blurred. Her watch and phone had been confiscated. She could only guess it was near dawn when an officer approached, a scowl plastered across his face. "Mitchell, you made bail," he said. "Let's go." Relief flared in Eliana, though confusion followed close behind. She hadn't been allowed a phone call. Who posted bail? She stood slowly, feeling the stiff ache in her muscles. The officer shoved a plastic bag of her personal items at her. Then, with an impatient nod, he led her to the station's exit. Eliana squinted at the morning sun, stabbing her eyes. It must have been around 7 a.m. Leaning against a battered old sedan was her friend Savannah Clark, arms folded. The tension in her stance eased slightly when she saw Eliana. "Oh, thank God," Savannah said, rushing forward to envelop Eliana in a hug. Eliana nearly collapsed in her friend's embrace, relief welling in her eyes. How did you know?" Eliana managed, stepping back to look Savannah over. Tasha's professional persona was in full swing, hair in a tight bun, business suit perfectly pressed. "Your mother called me when you didn't come home. Then I started calling around. Finally found out they had you here on a possession charge." Tasha's gaze hardened. "I called in favors and reached out to the local NLOPE branch to get you bail as fast as possible. We'll fight this, Eliana, I promise." Eliana took a trembling breath. "They planted it," she said, voice quivering with anger. Those cops, Travis and Brian Sloan, they pulled me over, forced open my trunk, then just magically found a bag of drugs. Tasha's lips thinned into a resolute line. We'll prove it. Let's get you out of here. You need some rest in the shower. Eliana nodded. Her body felt numb as she sank into the passenger seat of Tasha's car. The sun rose higher, revealing a hazy summertime sky. On another day it might have been beautiful, but Eliana's insides were churning. She was innocent, yet she was about to be dragged to the mud, and from the predatory glint she'd seen in the officer's eyes, it felt like the setup went beyond just them. Eliana suspected a system-wide corruption that stretched to every corner of Oakwood. She was determined to uncover it, even if it meant gambling with her own freedom. Over the next few days, Eliana found herself in a surreal nightmare. Savannah worked tirelessly, filing motions, requesting body cam footage, and gathering Eliana's community references. They both hoped that truth would emerge quickly, some glitch in the camera, or proof that the taillight had been tampered with. But the Oakwood Police Department was suspiciously uncooperative. Requests for the officer's body cam footage were met with red tape. Eliana's car, which might hold evidence of tampering, was locked away in an impound lot. Even Savannah had difficulty getting access to it. The situation worsened when Eliana received notice of her court date, just a week away. Her stomach sank further when she read who presided over her case, Judge Richard Whitmore. Eliana recognized the name. Whitmore had a reputation for being tough on drug offenders. Some said he was fair. Others claimed he handed down near maximum sentences for even minor possession charges. Eliana tried not to let fear swallow her whole. She had never had any run-ins with the law, so on the surface it should be an open and shut case of an unlawful arrest. But Eliana knew Oakwood's history of covering for its own. She braced herself for the worst. Meanwhile, Savannah dug into the background of officers Travis and Brian Sloan. What she found was a string of vaguely similar arrests. Young black residents who insisted they'd been targeted and framed. But each of those cases mysteriously vanished, either with plea deals or suspicious recantations from the defendants. Something stinks, Savannah said one evening in Eliana's living room, scanning through old records on her laptop. The rate of drug possession arrests by Travis and Brian Sloan is abnormally high. They always claim the suspect gave them probable cause, and yet every single request for body cam footage was either inconclusive or got lost. Eliana nodded grimly. They've done this before. The question is why, and who's letting them get away with it? Savannah added. The two women exchanged a look. Eliana's phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. Another outpouring of support from a neighbor who'd heard about her arrest. Dozens of people she'd helped over the years were calling and messaging, furious that Eliana could be accused of such a thing. But Eliana also saw the worry in her eyes when they spoke to her in person. They believed her, but they feared the power of the police, feared retribution if they spoke up. We'll keep digging, Savannah said, and we'll call in bigger guns if we need to. Eliana nodded, but as she turned her gaze toward the darkening window, she was haunted by an uncomfortable suspicion. They were up against more than just two dirty cops. There was a reason they had targeted her, and if Judge Whitmore was part of it, there could be an entire apparatus designed to silence people like her. The day of Eliana's hearing arrived under a slate-gray sky. Thunder rumbled in the distance, mirroring the tension in her gut. Savannah met Eliana on the courthouse steps. The building was a grand neoclassical structure, overshadowing the smaller municipal offices around it. Eliana had walked by it many times as a child, always feeling a solemn sense of respect for the law. Now those marble columns felt foreboding, as if they had a labyrinth of injustice inside. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Eliana's stomach twisted at the sight of officers Travis and Brian Sloan. They stood in crisp uniforms, flanked by other officers who patted their shoulders in silent solidarity. Their eyes met Eliana's with smug defiance. She looked away, a wave of nausea hitting her. Did they really think they'd get away with this? Judge Richard Whitmore arrived, robes swirling around him as he stepped onto the bench. He was tall, in his mid-50s, with a pronounced jawline that gave him a perpetual air of disapproval. He peered down over his half-rimmed glasses at Eliana. What followed felt like a carefully orchestrated performance. The prosecutor droned on about Eliana's alleged intent to distribute, citing the bag of powder found in her trunk and the incriminating behavior she'd shown. Savannah tried to argue Eliana's impeccable community record, pointing out the suspicious nature of the search, but Whitmore cut Savannah off repeatedly, sustaining every objection the prosecutor raised. Then came the shock. Whitmore denied Tasha's request to see the body cam footage, claiming the footage was lost due to a malfunction with the cameras at night. Savannah nearly exploded. "Your Honor, this is a critical piece of evidence. The entire case hinges on that footage. I said it's unavailable." Whitmore snapped, refusing to meet her eyes. "We'll proceed with what we have." When Savannah tried to reference Travis and Brian Sloan's arrest history, Whitmore ruled it inadmissible, calling it prejudicial evidence. By the time the hearing concluded, Eliana felt like she'd walked into a rigged game. Whitmore refused to dismiss the charges, setting a trial date 3 weeks away. Eliana was left reeling, wondering if the judge had any intention of allowing a fair trial at all. Outside the courtroom, Eliana saw Brian Sloan and Travis standing with the prosecutor near a vending machine, exchanging low chuckles. She clenched her fists. Savannah guided Eliana away before she did something rash. "We'll regroup," Savannah said quietly. "I'm not backing down." Eliana nodded, grateful for Tasha's unwavering support, but she also understood now that they were fighting a system deeply invested in convicting her. The turning point came unexpectedly. One late afternoon, a knock at Eliana's door startled her from her restless doze on the living room couch. She looked through the peephole. A knock at Eliana's door startled her from her restless doze on the living room couch. She looked through the peephole. A woman with anxious eyes and a hood pulled low over her face stood on her porch. Eliana hesitated, but something about the woman's expression, an urgent plea, made her open the door. "Ms. Brooks?" the stranger asked, voice hushed. "My name's Lena Porter. I think I can help you." Eliana stepped aside, letting Lena into the modest living room. "Help me how?" Lena glanced around, as if worried about hidden microphones. She was petite, her hands trembling nervously. I used to date Officer Travis," she confessed, wringing her hands. "He's not a good person. I read about your case in the newspaper. The Charleston Post and Courier did a piece on your arrest. I believe you're telling the truth, that he framed you because he's done it before." Eliana's heart pounded. "Can you prove it?" Lena swallowed hard. "I think so. I was with Travis, Officer Travis, for 3 years. He never hid his prejudices. He boasted about arrests. A few months ago I found out he and Brian Sloan were bribing Judge Whitmore, so their cases would sail through. Travis bragged that Whitmore had a gambling debt, and Travis claimed it gave him leverage. They'd pay him off, and Whitmore would bury evidence, rule in their favor. The whole deal." Eliana's eyes widened. This was far bigger than she'd even suspected. "Do you have any kind of documentation, or—" Lena pulled out her phone, unlocked it, and showed Eliana a series of text messages. Eliana's hands trembled as she scrolled. The messages were from Travis's phone number, referencing payoffs, Judge Whitmore, and our best arrangement yet. Eliana read the lines over and over, her shock intensifying. Eliana nearly dropped the phone. This was a smoking gun, a direct link between corrupt officers and a corrupt judge. "Wanda, this could blow this case wide open." Lena nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. "I know I'm scared, but it's time someone exposed them." Eliana reached out, clasped Lena's shaking hands. "Thank you. I have a lawyer, my friend Savannah Clark. We need to show her these messages. She'll know what to do. She can protect you." Lena gave a teary nod. Relief flooded her features. "I just hope it's not too late." Little did either of them know. Powerful forces were already in motion to keep the scandal hidden. The same evening Lena visited. Savannah was in her office preparing a motion to compel the court to turn over any existing camera footage. The new text message evidence could change the entire case. She planned to share it with Eliana, and then decide how best to present it to a higher court, maybe even get the FBI involved for judicial corruption. She stayed late, after her colleagues had gone home. Overhead lights flickered in a nearly empty law office. She opened documents on her computer screen, analyzing every reference to Judge Whitmore and the bank accounts. This was big, maybe big enough to blow up the entire Oakwood law enforcement system. A sudden sense of unease ran down Savannah's spine. She paused, listening for footsteps in the hallway. Her office door was slightly ajar, letting in a bit of fluorescent light from the hallway. She stood and looked out. The hallway was deserted. Was she just nervous? She sat down, trying to focus on the movement. Another noise, clearer this time, like a light scuffle. She turned back to the door, her heart pounding. She was about to stand when the door burst open. 2 masked men dressed in black rushed in. Savannah screamed, but one man covered her mouth. The other yanked the power cord from her computer, ripped it out, and slammed the tower to the floor. Her eyes widened in horror. She struggled, trying to fight back, but the men were strong and well-trained. Before she could get away, they ripped the phone off her desk, yanking the cord out of the wall. It was a whirlwind. Savannah felt a sharp blow to her ribs, pain shooting to her hip, and a black-gloved hand pressed firmly against her mouth, muffling her attempts to scream. You like to poke your nose where it shouldn't be. One of the men growled. He rummaged at the table until he found the flash drive Savannah had used to back up Lena's messages. With a sinister grin behind his mask, he snapped it in half. Tears of rage welled up in Savannah's eyes. These weren't random criminals. They knew exactly what they were doing. She tried to see if there was any identifying features, but they were dressed in dark clothing and masks, their eyes cold and merciless. Next time, one of them hissed, "Shut your mouth or we'll shut it forever." With that, they slammed Savannah into the corner of the table. Pain exploded in her shoulder, and then everything went black. When Savannah hit the corner of the table, pain exploded in her shoulder, and then everything went black. When Savannah woke up, her head was pounding and her shoulder felt dislocated. Papers and broken computer parts were scattered across the floor. Her phone was gone, as was digital backups of text messages. She struggled to sit up, wincing as the pain flared. Fear and anger boiled in her gut. This was a direct attack on Eliana's defenses, and more than that, a warning. She crawled to her purse, which had been knocked over during the scuffle. Miraculously, her personal cell phone was still inside. They must have missed it. With shaking hands, she dialed 911. The operator's voice was clear and professional, though Savannah could barely piece her words together. She reported the break-in, the assault, her suspicions that it was related to some kind of police corruption. Officers from the Charleston Police Department arrived before the Oakwood Police Department could. Savannah had specifically told city officers not to trust anyone from Oakwood. An ambulance took her to the hospital, where doctor confirmed she had a sprained shoulder, bruised ribs, and a concussion. Savannah gave her statement to Charleston detectives, leaving no details unexplained. She confessed that she feared that the Oakwood officers or their associates might be behind the attack. The Charleston detectives exchanged worried glances, but promised to investigate. As Savannah lay in her hospital bed, her mind was in turmoil. The man had destroyed her digital backups, but Lena might still have those messages on her phone. Perhaps Savannah could salvage them from Eliana's phone too, since Eliana had forwarded some screenshots. They hadn't erased the truth completely. Savannah's phone buzzed. She winced, carefully reaching for it with her good arm. Private number. She hesitated, then answered. "Miss Clark," said a male voice, quiet and measured. "You don't know me, but I'm an ally. I heard what happened. I can help." Savannah tensed. "Who are you?" "Someone on the inside," the voice said. "I've been collecting evidence on Whitmore, Travis, and Brian Sloan for months. It's bigger than you realize. They threatened me, too, but if you're willing to fight, I could provide a trove of information, evidence you can use in court, evidence that can get the FBI involved." Savannah's mind spun. "Why should I trust you?" A pause and a heavy sigh. "You have no reason to. But I'm the only chance you've got right now." The line crackled. "Meet me at the old Riverside factory near the county line tomorrow at midnight. Come alone. Bring Mrs. Brooks. I'll give you what you need." Savannah bit her lip. This was risky. They could be leading her into Mrs. Brooks. "I'll give you what you need." Savannah bit her lip. This was risky. They could be leading her into a trap, but she had no choice. Eliana's future depended on unearthing real proof of the conspiracy. "All right," Savannah said quietly. "We'll be there." The call ended. Savannah felt her heart racing. She needed to get out of the hospital, warn Eliana, and make a plan. As terrifying as this was, she sensed it was the break they needed. Maybe their secret ally could help them expose the entire system. The next day, Eliana helped Savannah check out a hospital. The bruises on Savannah's face and the sling on her arm made Eliana's blood boil. They sat in Eliana's cottage, blinds drawn, discussing a mysterious phone call. "This is dangerous," Eliana murmured. "They already attacked you once. They might try again." Savannah nodded, wincing at the pain. "But we can't just give up. If this person really has evidence, bank statements, recorded conversations, anything that proves Whitmore and the cops are in collusion, it could be what finally frees you. And not just you, maybe all the people they framed over the years." Eliana stared at her friend, dread and hope swirling inside her. "Then let's do it. We'll be careful." They spent the afternoon strategizing, making sure their phones were fully charged, carrying backups of Lena's texts on separate flash drives. Eliana still had copies of some of the messages Lena had sent her, and she forwarded them to a private email as well. Savannah insisted on multiple backups. "Redundancy is our only defense right now," she said. When midnight approached, they drove to the abandoned Riverside factory, an old textile mill that had gone bankrupt decades ago. The structure loomed against a moonlit sky, windows shattered, the parking lot full of weeds. Eliana's heart pounded in her throat as they parked to the edge of the lot, headlights off. Silence enveloped them. "Do you see anyone?" Eliana whispered. Savannah shook her head. "Wait there." She pointed to a faint beam of light near the factory side entrance. They left the car and approached cautiously. Eliana's footsteps crunched on broken glass. The door creaked as they pushed it open. The inside was a maze of rusted machinery and tattered office petitions. A single lantern glowed in one of the corridors. Standing beside was a man in a hoodie, face partially in shadow. Eliana recognized him from around Oakwood, Marcus Reed, a city clerk who sometimes attended public council meetings. She never suspected him to be part of this fiasco, but it made sense now that he was an insider. Savannah cleared her throat. "We're here." Marcus nodded. He shifted the lantern, illuminating his anxious features. "I'm sorry about the cloak and dagger routine, but I had to be sure no one followed. Whitmore and those officers have eyes everywhere." "You said you have evidence," Eliana said. Marcus nodded, pulling a small laptop from his bag. "I work in the finance department at City Hall. I started noticing odd transactions that link Whitmore's personal accounts to multiple offshore accounts. Then I realized some of these deposits came from private accounts that were tied indirectly to Travis and Brian Sloan. I did more digging. I found logs of cases Whitmore presided over that ended suspiciously. The final puzzle piece was seeing your name Eliana pop up in references to a target Travis was going after." Savannah inhaled sharply. "So they singled Eliana out specifically?" "Yes. Eliana has been championing a local oversight committee to track police misconduct. She's close to the folks at the NAACP that threatened the cozy arrangement Whitmore and the cops had. They decided to take her out before she could get more traction." Eliana's stomach twisted. She remembered how she'd been advocating for an independent board to review all police stops, demanding body cam footage for accountability. She hadn't realized she'd become a big enough threat to be framed so blatantly. Marcus set the laptop on a broken table. "Here, the files are all saved locally. Bank statements, email correspondences, hidden camera footage. Yes, I got footage. Whitmore met with Travis at a motel once, and I installed a hidden camera in the hallway. It's not perfect, but you can see them exchanging an envelope." He opened a folder playing a grainy video. It showed Whitmore in plain clothes. Travis handing over what looked like a thick envelope. The date stamp was just 2 weeks ago. Eliana's eyes widened. This was exactly the kind of damning proof they needed. But before they could rejoice, a noise echoed to the empty factory, a metallic clang, like a door being forced open. Savannah and Eliana froze. Marcus turned off the lantern. plunging them into near darkness, except for the laptop's faint glow. "They found us," Marcus hissed, shutting the laptop's lid. A beam of flashlight cut through the corridor, landing on their small group. Eliana's heart lurched. Two silhouettes advanced, and she recognized them instantly. OFIC officers Travis and Brian Sloan. Well, Travis sneered, his voice bouncing off the concrete walls. "Guess you just can't stop snooping, can you?" Brian Sloan's bulk filled the corridor, a menacing shape. Eliana's mind raced. They were unarmed, corniced. The cops had guns. "Stay back," Savannah snapped. "We're meeting here on private business. You have no authority to search us without a warrant." Travis Holden let out a harsh laugh. "You think that matters?" He aimed a flashlight right at Marcus's face. "We know you've been poking around accounts you shouldn't. We're here to shut you all up, permanently if we have to." Brian Sloan's hand hovered near his holster. "Let's just say the report will read, 'We found a group of criminals trespassing. They pulled a weapon. We responded with lethal force.'" Eliana felt panic burn in her chest. They needed to escape. But how? The cops blocked the corridor, the only exit route they knew. Marcus swallowed. "We have copies, multiple copies of everything," he bluffed, raising his voice. "Even if you kill us, the evidence will come out." A flicker of uncertainty passed over Travis's face. Brian Sloan wavered too, scanning the darkness behind him. Eliana latched on to that moment of hesitation. She spotted a side hallway to their left, half blocked by debris. "Run," she whispered to Savannah and Marcus. Then she grabbed a chunk of broken metal pipe from the floor. "If they come closer, I'll distract them." Savannah's wide eyes reflected fear and determination. Marcus clutched the laptop tightly. In a burst of movement, Eliana hurled the pipe down the corridor past the officers, causing a loud clatter. Instinctively, Travis and Brian Sloan whipped around. Eliana, Savannah, and Marcus sprinted in the opposite direction, heading for the side hallway. Shots rang out. The deafening cracks echoed in the opposite direction. Heading for the side hallway. Shots rang out. The deafening cracks echoed in the cavernous factory. Bullets ricocheted off metal. Sparks flying. Eliana's heart pounded as they ducked behind a rusted machine, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "This way," Marcus hissed, guiding them through a gap in the machinery that led to a back corridor. They ran, weaving through dark passageways. The smell of dust and decay thickened the air. The cops' footsteps thundered behind them. Eliana's lungs burned. Another shot rang out, shattering a nearby window. Glass rained down, slicing. Eliana's lungs burned. Another shot rang out, shattering a nearby window. Glass rained down, slicing Eliana's arms with tiny cuts. They reached an emergency exit door. Marcus shoved it hard, but it stuck. He rammed his shoulder against it again. It burst open, letting them spill out into the night air. Rain had started pouring, soaking them instantly. "Get to the car," Savannah yelled. They dashed across the overgrown lot. Eliana could barely see through the sheets of rain. A bullet whizzed past her, lodging into the ground a few feet away. She stumbled but kept running. Finally, they reached Savannah's sedan. Marcus dived into the backseat, clutching the laptop. Eliana jumped into the front, Savannah behind the wheel. The car roared to life, headlights stabbing into the dark. A flash of white near the factory entrance. Eliana glimpsed Travis's face contorted in rage, gun raised. Savannah floored the accelerator, tires screeching against wet asphalt. Another shot rang out, cracking the rear windshield. Shards of glass pelted the interior, but Savannah kept driving, the engine whining as the sedan sped away. The road was slick, the wipers struggling to clear the downpour. Eliana's pulse thundered in her ears. She cast a quick look at Marcus in backseat, who pressed the laptop protectively against his chest. Savannah inhaled a shaky breath, wincing at her own injuries, but her focus stayed locked on the road. They drove in tense silence for several miles. Finally, Eliana exhaled, laying out a trembling half-laugh, half-sob of relief. "We made it," she whispered, though she had no doubt Travis and Brian Sloan would keep hunting them. For now, they had the evidence in hand, hopefully enough to destroy Whitmore's web of corruption once and for all. They knew staying in Oakwood was too dangerous. Brian Sloan and Travis would likely broadcast an APB on them, claiming anything from resisting arrest to attempted murder. So they headed straight to Charleston, booking into a small hotel near the downtown area. The next morning, Eliana called a contact at the local NAACP office, explaining the situation. The organization vowed to help provide safe accommodations and reach out to federal authorities. In a cramped hotel room, Savannah plugged Marcus's laptop into a secure drive. They combed to the files, bank statements, emails, phone call recordings. Every piece implicated Whitmore, Travis, and Brian Sloan in a conspiracy to extort or frame suspects, especially those who threatened to blow the whistle on their corruption. Whitmore had reaped thousands in bribes for ensuring convictions and harsh sentences. Savannah's eyes were alight with fierce satisfaction. "We have enough to bring in the Department of Justice, Eliana. This is bigger than state level. We can reach out to the U.S. Attorney's Office." Eliana squeezed Savannah's uninjured hand. "Do it. Let's get the feds involved." A plan took shape. They would present the evidence to a federal prosecutor. Meanwhile, the NAACP will hold a press conference with Eliana telling her story and unveiling the damning proof. This way it will become national news, making it harder for Oakwood's corrupt network to bury. That evening, Eliana stood at the podium in the Mattock's modest conference room in Charleston. Cameras clicked. Reporters scrawled notes. Savannah and Marcus flanked her. She recounted her arrest, the planted evidence, and a near-fatal chase at the abandoned factory. Then she displayed printouts of Whitmore's suspicious bank transactions, reading out some incriminating text messages from Travis to Whitmore. "I'm not the first they've framed," Eliana said, voice trembling with anger, "but I'm determined to be the last." She stepped away, letting Savannah detail the legal steps they were taking. Marcus provided his testimony about finding the financial documents. The press, including a reporter from the Charleston Post and Courier, buzzed with excitement, sensing a huge scandal that could rock the entire region. By the time the press conference ended, Eliana felt a weight lifting. The truth was out in the open. Even if Travis, Brian Sloan, and Whitmore tried to retaliate, the national spotlight might protect her. She just prayed it wasn't too late for justice. Within days, the story exploded across local and national media outlets. CNN picked it up, shining a bright light on Oakwood's pattern of questionable convictions. Civil rights groups demanded Whitmore's immediate suspension, shining a bright light on Oakwood's pattern of questionable convictions. Civil rights groups demanded Whitmore's immediate suspension. Protests erupted outside the Oakwood Police Department, where citizens demanded the resignation of Travis, Brian Sloan, and any other complicit officers. Behind the scenes, the wheels of justice turned. A federal grand jury convened to consider indictments against Travis, Brian Sloan, Whitmore, and possible unknown co-conspirators. Evidence poured in from Marcus's files, Lena's text messages, and a string of victims stepping forward with stories of being framed. Savannah's phone rang day and night with calls from potential whistleblowers. Despite the swirl of fear and hope, Eliana found herself in a state of surreal calm. She'd risked everything to bring this corruption to light. If the system worked the way it was meant to, she'd be exonerated soon. Still, a small voice in her mind reminded her that power structures don't fall easily. She stayed on guard, moving from one safe place to another, never traveling alone. Then came the news. Judge Richard Whitmore was arrested by federal agents at his home. Photos of him being led away in handcuffs dominated the evening news. Eliana watched from Savannah's living room, tears in her eyes. "They got him," Savannah said softly, turning up the volume. The anchor recapped the charges: conspiracy to commit bribery, obstruction of justice, money laundering. Travis and Brian Sloan had been arrested that same morning, charged with civil rights violations, conspiracy, and more. The anchor went on to say the U.S. Attorney's Office had also uncovered evidence linking them to multiple fraudulent arrests, Eliana's being the most prominent. Savannah turned to Eliana with a grin. "It's over." Eliana swallowed a lump in her throat. "It's not over until I'm fully cleared, but—" She let out a shaky breath, relief washing over her. "It's close." Within hours, Eliana's lawyer received official notice. The charges against her were being dropped, effective immediately. Not only dropped, The U.S. attorney was looking into potential restitution for the harm caused by the false arrest. When Eliana heard the news, she collapsed onto the couch, tears of joy streaming down her face. Savannah laughed and cried with her, hugging her tight. They'd done it. They'd toppled one of the most insidious webs of corruption in Oakwood's recent history. And Eliana, the woman they tried to break, turned out to be the catalyst for their downfall. A week later, Eliana found herself in a new swirl of media attention, but this time for positive reasons. People kept asking the same question: why did they pick you to frame? Of all the activists, why you? As Eliana told her story, it became clear that her unwavering activism, her ties to the NAACP, and her push for police oversight made her a prime target. But there was a deeper twist. After Eliana's exoneration, more details surfaced about her background. She had, in fact, come from a lineage of powerful civil rights advocates. Her late grandfather had marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and her father had served as a legal consultant for major civil rights cases. Eliana had always downplayed this heritage, wanted to forge her own path, but in the end, that very legacy gave her connections and resources she'd barely tapped into, resources that made it possible to swiftly mobilize support from the national NAACP, from civil rights lawyers, and from the media. Once the local press uncovered Eliana's family background, the headlines morphed into a narrative of poetic justice. The granddaughter of a prominent civil rights activist takes down corrupt cops and a crooked judge. The story resonated nationwide, shining a stark light on racial injustice in modern policing. The day Eliana was officially cleared of all charges, she stood on the steps of the Oakwood courthouse, the same building where she'd been humiliated only weeks prior, and delivered a triumphant speech. Cameras flashed. The crowd cheered. They tried to silence me with false charges, Eliana declared, voice strong. They tried to bury me under the weight of a broken system, but all they did was water the seeds of truth. And now that truth has grown too big, too loud to be ignored any longer. A roar of applause followed, tears glittering in the eyes of those who had supported her. By her side stood Savannah, Lena, Marcus, members of the NAACP, and other community leaders. Together they had proven that even the mighty corrupt system could be dismantled when people stood in solidarity. In the weeks that followed, the justice system made an example of those who abused its power. Judge Whitmore pleaded guilty in a federal plea deal to avoid a lengthy trial that would have exposed even more of his crimes. He received a hefty prison sentence, not the slap on the wrist some cynics expected. The gambling debts that had led him to accept bribes were overshadowed by the sheer cruelty of his actions. He lost his judgeship, his pension, and every last shred of respect he might have once had. Officers Travis and Brian Sloan faced a reckoning of their own, with multiple victims testifying an avalanche of damning evidence. They had no escape. They were charged with conspiracy, perjury, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. A jury convicted both men in a swift, decisive trial. Their sentences were harsh, and they went to federal prison. The media covered their downfall extensively, highlighting the hypocrisy of those sworn to protect the community. And the karma did not stop there. Investigations branched out, revealing more officers linked to lesser abuses of power. Some resigned under pressure. Others were fired. The Oakwood Police Department underwent a massive overhaul, pressured by lawsuits and protests. A federal oversight committee was introduced. Ironically, a massive overhaul, pressured by lawsuits and protests, a federal oversight committee was introduced. Ironically, the same sort Eliana had been advocating for all along. In one final act of poetic justice, Eliana sued the city and won a substantial settlement. Instead of using it for personal gain, she invested the money into a new community legal clinic, providing pro bono representation for those wrongfully accused or unable to afford a lawyer. She named it the Brooks Civil Rights Center in honor of her family's legacy. 6 months later, Eliana Brooks stood in the brand new offices of her family's legacy. 6 months later, Eliana Brooks stood in the brand new offices of her community legal clinic. Sunlight streamed through large windows onto freshly painted walls. The hustle of staff and volunteers filled the air, phones ringing, footsteps in the hallway, the hum of copy machines. It was a bustling hive of hope, Eliana's reflection gazed back at her from a framed picture of her grandfather on the wall, taken during the 1965 Selma March. She felt a surge of pride. There was still so much work to do, but they had made a breakthrough. The seeds of accountability had been planted in Oakwood, and she was determined to watch them grow. Lena Porter sat at a nearby desk, smiling as she typed. She had taken a job as a community liaison, bridging the gap between law enforcement, the reform portion of it, and the citizens they served. Savannah Clark was in a conference room down the hall, meeting with a team of young attorneys eager to make their mark on the world. Marcus Reed was also on board, using his administrative skills to ensure the city's new oversight policies were followed to the letter. The past months had seen Eliana recognized nationwide for her courage. She'd appeared on talk shows, participated in panel discussions about police reform, and even contributed to a documentary by the Charleston Post and Courier, highlighting the city's journey from scandal to reform. Always she credited the countless people who had stood with her, who refused to let corruption stand. A knock on the doorframe made her turn. A young mother stepped in, eyes brimming with tears. "Mrs. Brooks," she began, holding a stack of legal papers in trembling hands. "I need help. My son was arrested. They said he resisted an officer, but I swear he didn't." Eliana gave the woman a gentle smile, motioning her sit. "We're here to listen," she said. "We'll do everything we can." As Ebony guided the woman to a chair, she felt the weight of her own journey. From the terrifying moment she was framed to that final victory over the system that tried to crush her, everything had led to this point. She had chosen not to be consumed by vengeance or anger. Instead, she had forged a path that opened doors for others seeking justice, and that, in the end, was who Eliana Brooks truly was, not just a victim of a corrupt system, but a catalyst for change, the granddaughter of civil rights heroes, and a hero in her own right. Her story became a testament that no matter how dark the road or how high the odds, truth has a way of emerging when courageous people band together, and sometimes the hardest struggles yield the sweetest, most resounding triumphs. In the end, the truth couldn't be silenced. The corrupt officers were arrested, the judge exposed, and the system that tried to destroy Eliana Brooks was forced to answer for its crimes. But this wasn't just a victory for one woman. It was a message to everyone who had ever been wrongfully accused, silenced, or made to feel powerless. Eliana refused to be just another statistic. Instead, she became a force for justice, proving that when people stand together, even the most powerful corruption can crumble. But stories like this happen every day, and not everyone gets a chance to fight back. If you believe in justice and exposing the truth, and in stories that make an impact, subscribe to the channel now. Want to fight back?